This is Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. When I think about the critical issues facing Black and brown residents in the St. Louis area, I often ask the questions: how did we get here? What's holding us back? And how do we progress? At 9 PBS, we want to deepen our understanding and change the narrative. Join me as I look for answers and discover solutions on today's podcast. How much more vibrant would the St. Louis economy be if more African Americans were thriving, educationally, financially, and emotionally? Why that's not happening and how to achieve it is at the heart of what economists are studying at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Today, we talk to the head of the Institute of Economic Equity and find out the impact of young Black men not being in the workforce or in school in St. Louis and the role that depression is playing in their lives. That's next on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.
Welcome to another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. I am your host, Carol Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us again. I think we are at 25 plus episodes. By the time you see this one, I think it'll be 27. So you're hanging in there with me, and I appreciate it. I thank you so much for sharing, for subscribing, and for liking the podcast. And your questions and comments, I love those as well, because it tells me that you are listening, ingesting, and you've got questions about what we are discussing. So do feel free to leave us comments. I will comment on those. And if you have an idea about a topic we should address or a person we should have on the podcast, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we talk about the economy, we talk about equity, and we talk about how African Americans in St. Louis fit in, where they stand, especially those who are 18 to 24 years of age. We're also going to discuss a relatively new phenomenon, and that is called disconnected youth. I'll tell you what that is in just a moment, but want to welcome our guest today, who I have talked to on the phone, interviewed him a couple of times on the phone, but we're meeting for the first time in person today. He is the director of the Institute of Economic Equity at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, economist William, or as he will be known today, Bill Rodgers, joins us. It's so great to meet you in person.
Likewise, Carol. Thank you for having me. It's truly an honor.
When you tell people at parties that you're an economist,
right,
do their eyes glaze over, or?
No, they will either tell me a story about how economics was their worst class in college, or they'll ask me, should I sell or trade my stock?
Neither of those things did I think about.
Yeah.
Neither of those things.
Yeah.
First of all, statistics.
Yes.
Worst class.
Mm-hmm.
I left skid marks on the floor leaving that class at Mizzou. Not good at any of this at all.
Mm-hmm.
As a reporter and news anchor over the years, it's not really something that you are taught as a reporter to really understand the economy. So reporters who are reporting on it, that's why there are business reporters, of course, who specialize in it. But I don't know that many Americans necessarily understand, from an economist standpoint, the economy. We just know how much milk costs.
Well, but that is it, though. I think people really do end up undercutting themselves in terms of, or underappreciating themselves in terms of their economic knowledge. Just like Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, used to say, all politics is local.
Right.
I've come to say, and I'm influenced by former President Clinton, but all economics is local. Just the simple relationship we're going to talk about later.
Right.
That economic growth is the sum of productivity growth plus population growth. And so what a lot of the challenges that that the United States economy and communities have been facing is, how do we maintain our productivity? Why is that so important? Well, your productivity ties directly to the value the economy sees in what you're contributing. And so investing in education, investing in training, investing in policies that help to promote equity, These are very, very important, not just at the macro level, international level, but down even to the street and local neighborhood level.
We certainly, as I talk to a lot of people, because about the issues that and challenges that African Americans face in St. Louis, I knew going into this that there are those who, when you say equity, they shut down. And so the fact that you have an Institute of Economic Equity, people may or may not want to hear it. And that's okay. That's not what I'm here for. But describe what the Institute, the purpose of the Institute is, and its impact on the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis region.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we at the Institute, we are a collection of researchers. Myself as the director, and then I have 4 other researchers: PhD, a psychologist, an economist, a data analyst. And our mission is really around doing research that helps to move communities from surviving to thriving. And one of the comments I do also have to make before I sort of dig in deeper is that everything I will share today are my own views and not the views of the bank nor the system.
We're not making policy statements today. Okay,
exactly. And so we're all about helping communities move from survival to thriving. What do? We focus on 3 main areas of our research: wealth equity, labor market and workforce issues, and then also community impact and community response. So what would be some examples? 2 of our scholars, Lowell Ricketts and Anna Kent, they've been doing a lot of great work on racial differences and ethnic differences in wealth, also across generations. And their work, primarily descriptive, is very important as community members, as policymakers, as the broad general public are thinking about or developing narratives for addressing issues. So, for example, I believe like the typical black households, they have like 12 cents for every dollar of wealth that whites do.
12 cents.
Yep, 12 cents.
I remember reading, and don't lose your train of thought, that even a Caucasian mother on welfare has more money than a black mother not on welfare.
Well, there's a difference. There's income or resources, and then there's also wealth. And the difference between that, I want to come back to that, but the key reason why we're focusing on wealth so much is if you've ever seen Chris Rock has this wonderful sort of stand-up about what's the difference between rich and being wealthy.
Wealthy.
And that, as he says, and he does it so perfectly, is that wealth allows you to create more wealth. Wealth allows you to create opportunity. One of his jokes was, he said, Oprah Winfrey is rich, Bill Gates is wealthy, right? He's able, he talks about so and so is wealthy because they own the color blue, right? And
Tiffany.
Yeah, exactly.
Tiffany's.
So wealth is very important. It allows various families, if you have more of it, to also to be innovative, to be able to put your kid through college without having to take on debt, because then that extra money that you're not spending on student loans or paying back student loans can go into other pursuits. So their work is really, really important. Then, in terms of the labor workforce portfolio that we have, the big thing I've been coming now. I'm a full-time resident here in St. Louis and the city, and I've been commuting for about 2 years from here to New Jersey. But when that started, I started to come here with the pandemic. Now we have inflation, and so there's been a lot of concern about the slowdown in the economy. And so what I created with our labor workforce group is what we call our vulnerable populations or vulnerable groups initiative. And basically we are monthly, when like this Friday, new data on the labor market will come out.
Right.
And we are monitoring particularly those we're talking about later, as you said, those disconnected youth. We'll talk about, we're monitoring what's happening to young black men who've had difficulty getting a toehold into the economy. And also, we're also very, very concerned about young white men. There's been some seminal work by Angus Deaton and Ann Case on, it's called The Deaths of Despair. And yes,
Right.
Various
Who feel they have no place, no
Right.
future.
And it shows up in terms of the leading cause for why U.S. mortality rates have been started to rise since 1990. It's because non-college educated white men have been either committing suicide, other addiction
and
accidental
accidents.
death.
Yeah,
exactly. And so we are very much concerned. And again, this ties right back to that first statement I talked about. The economic growth is the sum of productivity growth and population growth. And so, if you have more and more individuals who are having difficulty mental health wise,
right.
that's going to make it harder for them to be competitive into the workplace.
And the economy does not grow nor flourish when you have significant parts of the population that aren't growing or flourishing.
Exactly.
Which is the whole reason, the basic reason to look at these things through an equity lens.
Right. And one of the reasons why I think the Institute was created was there was internal conversations within the Fed that, we have this dual mandate where it's about stable prices and maximum employment. And we've come to, I say we, myself, and then my Institute colleagues, we firmly believe that a 20 to 30% gender pay gap where women are earning less than men, or an unemployment rate where black unemployment rate, even in good times, is twice that of the white unemployment rate. That's not consistent with the dual mandate, and that really sits on top of our mission here at the Institute. And then the third area that we work on is, because it's a community impact, community response. And so one of the key projects that's been done there is it started off as talking with service providers, social service providers, about how the pandemic was affecting their ability to meet the needs of people in their community. But we've sort of pivoted, and now that survey, which is in field, is on. We're going to start to analyze it in any day now. But that survey now is pivoted to and focuses on kind of just community conditions, right? What are the conditions in your community, such as if you had a natural disaster, and how has that made it much harder for those in those communities to again survive relative to thriving.
When I looked at the State of Economic Equity report, the last one, you noted that this is an age group that has faced the pandemic and a recession, now high inflation, and what that you describe at the Federal Reserve as the tightest labor market since World War II. So how have those major events impacted young adults who are black, who lag behind in education, who lack resources, and who face a system that seemingly is not built for their advancement?
Right. Well, one of the knee-jerk responses to these types of challenges that blacks and other groups face is, well, you just need to
work hard.
Yeah, exactly. Fix yourself. That's right. That's right. It's
this is the bootstraps thing that I've always hated, because what if you don't have boots? But go ahead. Right.
Or what if you're starting the race? They're shooting the gun off, and they hold you in the blocks, right, until for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and then you got it right. You got to try to catch up, and so the bottom line here is that a lot of their knee-jerk or quick responses, and particularly in my profession, the economics profession, has been, it's all about the skills, it's all about education, it's all about your family, and I don't want people or listeners to think that I don't think those matter. I think those matter a great deal.
I agree,
but some of the research that we've done at the Institute and other colleagues throughout the U.S. have shown that there are what we call structural barriers. Redlining, right, is probably the most commonly cited.
Long-lasting. Banks said, no, we're not going to lend in that zip code.
Right. And as economic historian Bob Margo used to say, that these cumulative causal effects that explain outcomes today, and redlining is a perfect example of that.
And I want to say to people who, because I know there's just this underlying thought that, like you mentioned, just work hard, just do better. And I believe it was former Mayor Clarence Harmon who tells the story of not being able to get a loan in the neighborhood where he wanted to buy a house.
Yes.
The Clarence Harmon, the former mayor of St. Louis, faced that. This is, of course, before he was mayor.
Yes.
But was an educated man and could not. So this is not just an issue of work hard.
Right.
That's the meaning of structural. That it doesn't matter who you are.
That's one example of structure.
One example.
One of many examples of structure. There's also structure that provides privilege. And that also and it sorts out via either race and ethnicity or even by gender. Some of the things I focus on as being a labor economist, I look at policies or issues where we like to say this is a race neutral, and this is also a racially based cause. So discrimination, fighting discrimination, that is a policy that could be viewed as being more race specific.
Right.
But what's happened during my career, when I started in the early 1990s and was maturing and going through college in the 80s, was this shift from race specific causes structural causes were very important. So continued discrimination, racism, sexism, but there's been a growth in what we call race neutral factors that have created or an inability for inequality, racial inequality to narrow. For example. And as I say this I'm talking about research, and I'm not necessarily endorsing that we raise the minimum wage, but there's ample research to show how that since the 1980s, the federal government has been much reticent about raising the minimum wage. Well, a larger share of blacks are at the lower part of the income scale, and when you have a policy that is again, it's not targeting blacks.
It still affects.
It has a disproportionate impact because blacks are more likely to have benefited from a minimum wage increase, which would then make them more productive, which would then increase economic growth. What's another? There are education policies that have also gotten inculcated and created these structural barriers or hurdles. Again, the key point here is that through no fault of the individual, right, these barriers there, right, make it harder for them to participate.
Right.
One of the most common ones that came out of the pandemic was childcare. Right, that the challenges that again all families face, but in particular a lot of black moms. And in black families, right? They were having difficulty getting access, or they've always had difficulty getting access to good child care, but the pandemic really exacerbated the fact that there's this industry that is really needs an overhaul.
And it was the fragility of it. Was so known so quickly.
Right.
My husband and I remember us saying that we were so grateful that our kids were not daycare aged. What was I going to do as a news anchor at the time if I needed to stay home and school my children?
Right.
I mean, I could have done it because I was in an economic position, but I knew that the women who were taking care of my parents in assisted living, how were they going to take care of their kids at home and find childcare and still afford it all?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I was surprised to find that early on in the economic equity report, the prevalence of depression as an issue, as a lag on the individual and therefore the economy.
Right. That finding was germinated off some work that I had been doing prior to coming to the bank 2 years ago. Done for the Century Foundation, think tank, and they're based in Washington D.C. and also in New York. And it was also prompted by reading the Angus Deaton and Case work on deaths of despair, where the rise in mortality rates here in the United States, while mortality rates in all other European countries, industrialized countries, have not risen. We stand as this outlier, and so And so that got me concerned, and also one of our leading economists in our field, who had been doing some seminal work, a man named Alan Kruger, on the role that addiction and mental health was contributing to lowering participation. He committed suicide a number of years ago. So with Alan's death and just my general seeing this, and also just having being connected in some communities where you see issues around depression and anxiety have emerged, that's become one of my calling cards. I've spent a lot of time in my earlier parenting life. I coached club soccer and club baseball in a fairly affluent community, but particularly these young men, and even a lot of young white guys too, young white men. They're very fragile.
And Bill, we have this sense, this tendency, a certain generation, I'm 62, to think that maybe it's our fault as parents that we coddled them. I didn't want them to go through what I went through, and my parents didn't want me to go through what they went through, and so there's a sense that we simply gave them too much. Now, you are an economist. I know you have a psychologist on staff. You and I are not that. But how have we? How are we understanding why this is happening, and then therefore again the impact on the economy?
Yeah, I think we're still at the beginnings. I think we've taken, and when I say we, again, in this case the economy and folks who work in this space. Prior to the pandemic, it was still almost taboo to admit or to talk about your anxiety, to talk about depression, and even though, and one of the charts that has drawn a lot of attention, it was in the state of economic equity, was the showing there's been this growth in depression, reported depression, and a divergence where younger people were reporting higher incidence or higher levels than older people. And I think from my experience, as I said, from 10 years of coaching competitive soccer, competitive baseball, being in a college campus. Prior to coming to the bank, I was at the college with Mary, my first job, and then Rutgers University, the Big Ten school in New Jersey. So I've been around a few children, a few kids, and my reading on it is that. And it comes back to my labor workforce agenda, and that is helping people be resilient. Right? Helping. I mean, I had little simple things of. I remember running a practice with the baseball kids and saying, "Okay, we're going to play home run derby, or we're going to play pickle," and these kids would look at me like a cyclops. Right? They had never heard of these things. And then the other ones would be with my soccer team. I'd say, okay, let's go. You're gonna play soccer volleyball. I want you to go set up the field. And these kids would come back. Oh, how big should the field be? How many times can we let the ball touch? Right. And a large part of that, I think, was related to some of the parenting. Right. That you had a lot of these kids who were coming from environments. And these are, again, from a fairly affluent community where they were not making choices or being taught how to make choices.
Right. They didn't have to.
Right. And then the other thing that I found really fascinating with these young men was, the fear of making a mistake. And one of the things I transformed my coaching, where I would never tell a kid where you need to be. I'd ask them, Is that the best place you could be on the field, or is that right? And so we turned into create an environment,
allowing them to make a decision.
Yes, exactly, and also that to realize if you failed, but if you made a mistake, that
it was okay.
Yeah, there's consequences, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah, but we are alive still. And
yes,
we're good.
Right.
But then we go back to the average black family making 12 cents. So if you are facing anxiety, depression, you're not mentally well, a family that has a whole dollar and you have 12 cents, that the impact is clear.
Sure. Well, yeah, and there's some really great work that one of my friends, Sandy Darity, economist from Duke /UNC. I'm still trying to figure out how he was able to manage academic appointments.
Little jealous about that.
Yeah, I would say jealous. It's how those two groups
How are
are
you handling?
Yes, how do you balance? Duke and I apologize.
He has two phones on the table. I've never met of course, I don't know many economists, but two phones. But your friend, two.
Yeah, but he and several others had done some early work that showed that Black families, because they have higher unemployment rates, because they have fewer resources, again, not through their own fault of their own, that their anxiety levels are higher, the depression levels are higher, and if you talk about the what's called the social determinants of health model, right, that this work feeds right into that, and then you can start to explain or understand why you see higher stroke rates,
high
in
blood
the Black
pressure,
community.
cancer, all of it.
Exactly.
All of it. Well, talk about has the wage gap worsened for Black young adults? So
it started out in the I'm going to have a little history question. Course here, but
I didn't mean that.
It'd be very quick.
I didn't mean to go from economy to history.
It'll be very quick. But it is important to show again how several points. One, how the role of a strong economy is, and so if people like today, people aren't understanding what the Federal Reserve is doing. And as Chair Powell said in his press conference the other day, after they decided to hold rates constant, but he had a question from a reporter. Says how does what the Fed is doing help out low income in families, or how does it help Black families out? And basically, there's research to show that the families that get hit hardest when inflation occurs are those with low to moderate income. And if you are what we call an ALICE family, where ALICE stands for asset limited, income constrained, and employed, and it's basically the number of households in your community that don't have enough income to meet their survival budget, right? These families are more adversely affected when you have inflation. So it's very important, right, that we fight inflation and get it to and get it to the target that he and the board want it to go to. So that's one piece that's really important. The other,
but that sounds like the wage gap has.
So during this period of time, it has narrowed a bit. Why is that? Because we've had such strong, even though we came out of the pandemic, the economy did rebound. Labor markets have been really strong. Black unemployment rates still are twice that of white unemployment rates, but they are at historical lows. Another thing that we've like to focus on in the Institute is not only the unemployment rate, the time it takes you to search for a job, but we also like to focus on the participation. I call it the sort of the spigot turning the water, because the way we define unemployment is, are you actively searching? Right. And one of the challenges with that statistic, when you're applying it to Black folks, is that many Black folks, because of either discrimination or other kinds of structural barriers or exhaustion, they choose not to search. And many of them will also sometimes be called what we call not disconnected, but we have another term for individuals who discouraged workers. Yeah, we're called discouraged workers. So they would take a job if they were offered a job, but they don't feel like it's there. So yes, there has been a narrowing, but here in St. Louis, our recent analysis still suggests that the Black-white wage gap is about 30% in hourly wages. We still see that household incomes are about 60% of whites, and some of the research that I've done that I like to talk about to help people get beyond just, okay, here's another gap. Because a lot of my colleagues who I've been meeting here in St. Louis, they're like, Bill, we know what the racial gaps look like, and so the question becomes, right, what I've done is help people see what would happen if we were to lessen those gaps. Right. So, for example, the Institute estimates that if we were to narrow the income gaps between Blacks and whites here in St. Louis, that would be an additional $7 billion of disposable income into the economy, and it's not this is the $7 billion. It's not going to create the equity. This is $7 billion that would be dispersed throughout the economy. So businesses, at one level, what Dr. King said in some work, a speech he did a number of years ago, he talked about how he was perplexed, right, that white businesses or businesses in general were willing to allow, right, racism to persist, because what they were doing, and he was not an economist. Like, back to your thing, you don't need a PhD to understand this or to figure this out. But he said, here, businesses, you're leaving profits on the table by allowing
practicing racism.
Allowing a situation where you've got a class or group of people who you've made it much harder for them to compete.
And if you can lean. You're leaning in. I love that, but you're leaning over the mic, so we want to hear everything that you are saying. So let us then describe, because I'm fascinated by this, disconnected youth. And are we talking 18 to 24 or younger than that?
Well, 18 to 24 is the typical range. Some people will do 16 to 24.
Okay.
Others will also include part of a definition of is the person in a training program.
Okay.
But the bottom line, the cleanest version or definition, which I use in terms of the statistics I'm going to share with folks today, is 18 to 24 years of age. You're not working in a job, nor are you in school. Why is this important? Well, the 18 to 24 years of age, that is, many people view as that's that stepping stone to launching right to the labor market, to your career. And the two ways that you really maximize the chances of a good jump into your career is obviously acquiring education, but also early work experience.
Right.
Whether it be like when we were growing up, babysitting or cutting yards, or washing cars or detailing cars, to now, I think in some cases, kids are in their summer camps. They're going to do programming or going to make apps. But anything that allows you to
get experience and skill, right?
Yes, and experience and the skill that folks are talking about are what we call soft skills. So the hard skill would be, yes, you're getting a PhD, a BA, or you're getting a high school diploma, but the soft skills are you on time?
Right.
Do you smile? Do you look at the other person when you're talking with them?
How do you shake hands?
Exactly. And these are very, very important. And one of the things that research has shown, when you look at people who are young folks who've been justice offenders or come into contact with the criminal justice system or been incarcerated, many of those soft skills diminish or they atrophy.
Right.
Some of it is depending upon the level of security in the environment. You have to surrender those.
They got hard skills.
Exactly.
Because they're hard, but they do not have soft skills.
Right.
And when the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis looked at disconnected youth, is there a gender difference?
Yes. In St. Louis, there is about 2/3 of these disconnected. So 18 to 24 not enrolled in school nor working. About 2/3 are men. And that's actually different. For Missouri, for the broader state, it's a little more equal in terms of the gender balance, and and then compared to the U.S., it's also a balance. And what was fascinating. When we did the report, we just focused on really just identifying the share of the population that's disconnected. And so in St. Louis, it's about 13% of young adults. But here's a key thing: when you break it by race, 21% or 1 in 5 of young blacks are disconnected.
Young black men?
Blacks in general.
Okay.
We're not able to sort of disaggregate with our sample or our data too far, but yeah. So 1 in 5 blacks, young blacks in St. Louis are disconnected, compared to only 13% for the overall group. What else is also interesting around who are the disconnected? Yes, so in St. Louis, about 2/3 are men. About 50%, 1 in 2. Come from families where their income in that family is $50,000 or less. And that's important because, again, back to the wealth conversation, right? That if you don't have the wealth, and hence if you don't have the income, it makes it harder for you to make those investments in early childhood investments into children, make those investments into these 18 to 24-year-olders that, again, provide the launching pad.
Do we have a sense of why? And this is more than ever before. Do we have a sense of why?
Yeah, I think there's.
And is it the pandemic?
Well, I think the pandemic helped to exacerbate what we're seeing or what we've experienced, but is my colleagues who I'm getting to know at the various institutions and think tanks here, and the nonprofits that the institute and more broadly the community development part of our bank works with. These people have been in the trenches working on it. We're on this issue. We to assist with them, we did a set of roundtables last summer, about 16, not in just St. Louis, but all throughout the 8th district. And what we found was, again, not rocket science, nothing new, but transportation continues to be a real big issue for this group. Obviously, training and education is a major issue. Why many are still not working. Soft skills also a bigger problem. Yeah, and then but also employers. That you have some employers I know it's been more of a national conversation, but one of our guests in what we call Conversations on Equity, where we have a leading scholar or practitioner come and I interview them, that he has found that there are a whole host of business practices that make it hard or challenge, and one of them is the requirement that the job have a college degree. That there's this requirement that many employers have, that the job requires a college degree, and he and some others like Byron August and there are working to help people see that. Let's look at your job.
Not necessary.
Exactly.
Necessary.
Exactly. And now if one released that off the pedal, that could be a major area where you could see some improved opportunity.
Right. And do we know if that group of disconnected youth, young black men mostly, more young black men in St. Louis who are neither in school and aren't working, 18 to 24, do they have high school diplomas or no? Is that a part of the study?
Yes. Well, that's actually some of the new evidence I was pulling together. And at this stage, what we're finding is that a large share of them, do have a high school diploma. Okay. If I'm remembering correctly.
Okay.
But the challenge is that we have to talk about the quality.
Of that degree.
Of that degree.
Yeah, of that educational experience.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And you can't expect this age group then to, maybe they can become entrepreneurs. I mean, stranger things have happened for sure, but I would not expect them to, that's not a group I'm saying you're going to be a homeowner before the age of 30 necessarily. On top of that, depression, anxiety, the wage gap, all of those things exist. So that the ripple effect of the economy on a whole group, not getting into the number one asset that leads to wealth, is a huge problem.
Right. And that it's a huge problem for the individual, for their family, for their street, for their neighborhood, right? And it just cascades and percolates. And one of the reasons why I mentioned Alice earlier,
asset limited,
income constrained and employed, and I'm Alice's brother. I actually helped to create this concept when I was back in New Jersey. The United Way of Northern New Jersey created this concept, and what was done with it was we're trying to help people see how they can enhance their time, their talent, and their treasure. That we were in a variety of communities that were actually fairly affluent, had poverty rates of like 3%, so very, very low. But we shone the light and said, hey, here's what's happening in those communities. Yeah, you may have a low poverty rate, but you've got 30 or 40% of those households who don't have a survival budget. And this isn't going to Disneyland. right? But they don't. And so two of the things that I would use in showing people the Alice data to again hammer home this issue of its structure and less so about the personal choice is that I would ask them. I said, okay, how many of you know someone who's in poverty? And most of these people, I presented this in front of one of our breakfasts with the Fed, a whole host of bankers, right? Very few of these people raised their hand. But then I start listing off a variety of occupations: public school teacher, a nurse, a barista at Starbucks. Then I ask, well, how many of you, right, know these people? Oh, the hands all shoot up, right? Why do they know them? Because they've got a spouse, they've got children, right? They've got nieces and nephews. And so from then on I'll say, so are they lazy?
No. And they would say no.
And they would say no. And I'm saying, okay, well, unfortunately, the way the economy has shifted and changed, many of these people they have much more in common with people who are in poverty by the government definition.
Right.
And so but I come back to them, I say, okay, we've just taken the lazy argument off the table.
Right.
Right. And then the next thing we'll do with the Alice numbers, we'll say, okay, in Missouri, over 40% of households are Alice.
40%?
Yeah. Mississippi, it's like 53%. But I'll then ask, well, what fraction of the population do blacks make up? And then it's like 10, 12%, and getting smaller in certain places. And then you start to see the
wheels turning.
The wheels turning.
Yeah.
Wow, this isn't fully a black thing.
Well, we've always said that. We've always said that I know what President Reagan, the late Ronald Reagan, did to put a black face on poverty.
That's right.
But we knew then that the majority of, and correct me if I'm wrong, of people on welfare, if you will, to use that general phrase, are Caucasian women. But people think it's mostly black.
Right.
I remember, this is an aside, but a colleague, a journalist in another market, another city, went out to record a report about, film a report about welfare reform. Came back, it was majority white people in the office, and the news director looked at the video and said, well, what is this?
Yeah.
And she said, I went to film, and he said, I need more black faces.
Right.
I need more black faces. And that's an aside. That's journalism.
Well, but it's not even just in journalism. I had a situation when I was working for one of the governors in New Jersey, and we got his attention around the arrest and incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders. We were seeing and showing up in the data that the marginal offender was a nonviolent drug offender, and they were being put into general population. Well, but the way we got the governor's attention was the budget, the amount of money it was the fastest
spent,
It was the fastest growing part of the budget. And so we've pulled together a group that said, we need to stop treating these people like criminals and treat the addiction, right, or treat the mental health issues that they're facing. Group was convened. There's myself and another fellow. We're the only guys of color in this room. And you know how there's like the meeting before the meeting, maybe not so much now with Zoom meetings, but right, where you come in and people start chatting. And so I remember coming into this meeting and folks start to basically divulging of like, well, yeah, I've got this relative, or this person in my family who's battling addiction. And it went around the table, and then
got to you and
my other friend, and we kind of look at each other. I'm like, no, it hadn't happened in my family.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel very blessed that it hasn't been an issue. But in the context of our conversation, right, we carry these subtle biases or subjectives, and that's something that's hard to quantify within the economics that we do. But it is
there's a role.
Yeah.
For our perception. Perception becomes policy,
right?
In far too many cases.
Yeah. So, and if I could add on to that, so we don't, our institute, we don't directly engage ourselves in policy debates that are prescriptive, but we do our research in the hope and also we try to be strategic about it to get it into the hands of decision makers,
right.
And also not even necessarily policymakers. I like to actually talk with business people. business leaders. I like to talk with community groups, right? Because these organizations, these are individuals. In many cases, they need what I call the narrative, or they need that evidence to be able to talk with a friend at a cocktail party, right? Or to talk with a friend, or to be able to say in a meeting, that's not what the data says, or that's not what, or here's a study that flies counter
to what you're
doing.
So back to home ownership, do you have those data points as to what that looks like in St. Louis as we watch construction? I don't know how many new apartment buildings I am seeing certainly around the city, and every time I see one, I think, that's $3,000 or that's $2,000 in rent. I have a 24-year-old son.
Yes.
When in looking for an apartment, wanted character. He wanted exposed brick, and he wanted granite. And I'm like, okay, yes. Mom makes money. You don't. You need to be looking for your income, not my income.
Right.
but at any rate, I mean, everything. If you wanted something nice and something safe, you're looking at $1,500. So that's not home ownership.
Yeah.
That's rental that is often out of reach. So do you have a sense of what home ownership is like for African Americans who are, as we have said on this podcast, we know, leaving St. Louis City, leaving St. Louis County, moving further west and into St. Charles for sure.
Yeah. I don't recall the specific estimates on home ownership differences or home ownership, but yes, there are stark differences in home ownership between blacks and whites here in the city, but also the value that value, and this is a really an epiphany for a number of scholars who we hosted. A couple weeks ago, we had a roundtable on racial equity that one of our staff researchers, Anna Kent, pulled together for us. And one of this epiphany that many people had was, and for you and I, we'd be like, really? That was an epiphany for you?
New, yeah.
But what it means to be black middle class is very different from what white middle class is. I first saw this when I would go visit my grandparents and my aunts and uncles that were in Memphis and Eastern Tennessee, but then also became really even more apparent to me when I lived in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I taught at the College of William and Mary there, but I was on the school board. I think the school board was the primary activity, so I spent a lot of time in the community, and you could see, right, there were these stark differences between what it. And so many people would get caught into this thing. Oh, yeah, they say middle class in general, but say no.
What is the difference?
Yeah. Well, one of it is the debt that one group has, that black middle class families may have, to which makes it harder for them to start a business or expand their business or have that second home. I mean, for a middle class family having that, but you may have parents who were able to get in and purchase that beach home or that home that's in the mountains, right? And then it gets passed down to the kids.
So this is what I'm seeing when I watch HGTV, and so often what I see is someone saying, and I don't know how often, but often enough that I see someone saying, this is their grandmother's house, and it was given to them, and now they get this $200,000 asset free and clear. Or there's one show that I watch often. They're remodeling lakefront property, and so often it is a piece of lakefront property that their father, mother, or their grandparents owned, and and that's it's not upper class. That's just middle class.
That's right.
My father was a drill sergeant. My father was a drill sergeant. There's no lake house.
Well, my father was the youngest of 8. He was the first in his group to go on to college, and
You got a lake house in your?
No.
Did you get that?
No, I'm hoping to have the lake house for my kids.
I'm with you on that one. I am with you on that one. Before we let you go, though, I know that again, we're not talking policy, but we are giving information, researching the communities that represent the district in order that people can make informed decisions. So what's your advice to local leaders, whether they be the elected leaders, but community leaders, of how to then bolster economic resiliency? I think is one way to put it. Stability,
Sure.
resiliency.
Yeah, I think I would flip it around and say to those folks who I'm increasingly getting to know is, what kind of research do you all need, or what kind of evidence do you all need to help build a case
And then
for
you can
equity?
then
Provide that service.
Interesting.
Yeah, because one of the requirements, or one of the parts of our charges at the Institute is to be a leader on equity conversations nationally, but also to be relevant, cognizant, appreciative of the needs
of the local
community,
because they are different,
right?
Right.
And the beauty of the Fed is that we have this really great capacity for being a convener. We hope to be having some more of these roundtable discussions coming into the year. I think the other piece for me it's flipping it around and saying, and I like to present myself as I don't come with all the answers. That I want to. I still feel like I'm on my listening tour and getting to know people here in the city. Begun to just have a good relationship with the United Way and Michelle Tucker,
excellent.
Yeah. So
person.
It's because it is in a lot of respects. I think about my coming to St. Louis, that it's now showtime. That I was doing a lot of the same work prior
on the East Coast,
on
right?
the East Coast, but I call that was really dress rehearsal. It was before. It was before the pandemic.
Okay.
It was before inflation.
And now you get to put all that.
That's right.
Overlay all that skill, all that knowledge, all that energy into the issues that this region is facing. And I will tell you, Bill, that as a journalist, 40 years in the state of Missouri as a news anchor, I look at every time I see a report of crime, I think of it in terms of individual, not black people. I, of course, as a black woman and a mother of sons, I'm not looking at it that way. I am looking at the individual and who are you supposed to be, and what were the impediments?
Yes. Right.
What happened in your life that you're not in college, that you are not starting a business, that you are not gainfully employed, that you are not a husband, that you are not a contributing factor, contributing member of society. That's how I look at it. And if we would look at individuals that way, then we would do what it takes to make sure that 17-year-old who just stole a car, that the 16-year-old would not be in that situation.
Right. Yeah.
So I want you to study all those things, Bill.
We will.
I want the information.
Well, it's what you said reminds me of some work that I had done a number of years ago, and this could bring me back to it sooner than later, and that is, a lot of the conversations, whether it be at the national level, local level, state level, even within neighborhood, and there's I think research to kind of support this, is that these conversations are around. We're gotten into a place where, like when I worked for President Clinton, and we were working on the budget, and it'd be, or when President Obama, some of his economists would ask me for advice. Many times they'd preface it and say, "Well, this is what we can afford." Or this is the cost. This is we can't spend. Okay. And I'm not saying that everything, every solution to our problems is spending. But what I'm getting at here is the framework that I like to think about with my staff and some of our research, and that is building this the picture of where we want people to live. How do we want people to live?
Okay.
How do we want them to be empowered?
Right.
How do we want them to have agency? Right. And then once you figure that out, right,
You go backwards.
then you have the conversation of, okay, now how are we
How do we get there?
What are the investments? What are the approaches that we can do to get ourselves there?
Because what you've just said rings so true to me, and not that we're looking at the cost, but there is a cost. There's a cost
Yes.
to 18 to 24-year-old black men in St. Louis not working and not being in school. There's a cost.
Yes, exactly.
And are we willing to continue to bear the cost? Now, I would leave you with this, what my pastor says. If you walk by wrong and do nothing, it becomes your standard.
Right. Right.
It is wrong for us to allow to look at young people and not want your potential to be developed. So that's not my standard of life. I want your potential to be. I need
Yes.
your potential to be developed, and whatever the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. I know people don't even think of that when they think of the Fed.
Well, we have.
That's why I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you, and I hope you'll have me back. And it's.
I'm gonna have you many other places. My wheels are turning as to where Bill Rodgers is going to show up next.
All right. Well, my phrase, put me in, Coach.
Yeah, I love it.
Because
Yes.
I've been at this work for probably 30-something years, and it started off with an internship in Washington D.C. with Senator Patrick Moynihan.
My goodness, he's a name dropper. I did not know that about him either.
But I had a great opportunity, and one of the early images around me wanting to focus my life on equity. One, my mom and my dad. My mom's is a social worker. My dad's a computer scientist.
There it is.
That's how you get an economist. But the other thing was I would come home in the winter of 81-ish, right? Yeah. And we would drive by the White House, and this was back when you could drive by the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah, before bollards.
Yes. And I would see homeless men sleeping on the grates. Now I've seen homeless men elsewhere, but something about they have an 18-year-old, or I'm seeing homeless men sleeping on the grates outside the White House.
The juxtaposition.
That just really stuck with me, and that's where I started going down that path of, okay, what's the narrative for these men? Is it that they're lazy, as was being told on the other side of the gates?
Right. Yeah.
And so my career has been around trying to empower people and communities with economic thought and analysis. So I'm loving it that I'm here.
We just scratched the surface. I mean, that is my overarching feeling here, that we have just scratched the surface. Is there a data point or a thought that you want to leave us with? Because you've got so much paper in front of you there.
And I didn't even look at it once.
You did not. And I'm so glad. I've been known to take notes away from guests because I just want you to come from the heart.
Yeah. Well, there was, as I was sharing, I dropped some new statistics for folks that we just put together, and I'm still learning it, feeling comfortable how to,
sharing it,
sharing it. But I think one big takeaway for folks is if you don't have a sense of urgency now, you really need to amp up your sense of urgency. We've been blessed to have a really strong economy, very tight labor market, and that's the best time to be trying to address structural challenges. We're trying to remove barriers during a time of plenty. And the reason why I say that is it comes from an experience with, and this is not dropping names, but
but go ahead.
But this is part of my narrative and my experience is in 2000 when I was at the Labor Department working for Alexis Herman. We had this wonderful event that we were promoting some work that the department was doing on young people, actually, disconnected youth. We presented it at the White House where President Clinton talked about it. But one of the most amazing things he did, and I'm speaking from my personal experience here, is he talked about the late 1960s, 1969. And at that time, that was the best economy since World War II. He talked about how we were able to implement a variety of initiatives to address programs to address equity, to address discrimination, to provide opportunity. But he then cautioned us, and he says, it took a lot of hard work to create that, but then you saw what happened in that summer, where it just, a lot of those gains or a lot of that momentum went away, and my feeling is
we're there.
We're there. And so
I can't even now you're making me think of the backlash, what happened after George Floyd was murdered live before our eyes, and then what happened with the DEI focus, and then now the backlash and the elimination in law in states of DEI. So I feel like, yes, we're there based on what you described.
Yeah. So increase your sense of urgency. But do it in a way that you're using good evidence, you're using good thinking, sound logic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much, and we've scratched the surface, and I have 5 people that I am going to text as soon as we get off of this podcast that you need to talk to Bill Rodgers and tell him what you need from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. He is the director of the Institute of Economic Equity, and he is an economist. Bill Rodgers with us on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Bill, it is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we thank you for joining us for another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Don't forget to share this podcast. And this is one, I think they all are, but it's another one where your comments are so welcome. Let us know what you think about everything that we had to say in this conversation. And I respond to almost all of them because I don't see all of them, but I try to respond to all of them. So thank you for commenting, for sharing, for liking the podcast, and especially for subscribing. We'll be back next week with another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Be well.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.